All right. Um, Hope everybody's having a great day today. It is Thursday afternoon, and I am excited. There's a lot of good things going on in my life right now, and just excited to study God's Word and offer some encouragement. So, this is the first video that is only available for our top two tiers. So, I want to thank you for your support, of course, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of share some extra things more than what was promised. One of those things was that we put out a post show that was only available for patrons, and so there are some things like that you're able to see. But I am so thrilled that we can talk about these things together, that we can serve God with each other, that we can encourage each other. But one of the difficult things that we may face in life is we may face these repercussions or punishments or suffering because of things that other people have done. And that's a hard situation to be in. It's a painful situation to be in, to be put in a place where you are negatively affected because somebody else made a mistake or somebody else sinned. I mean, it's similar to those cases where there's a one fault end to a marriage. Someone was faithful and they tried to do right, but then the other party just decided not to be faithful and to go after other things. But that person that didn't do anything wrong, they're directly affected. Um, you know, I think about parents, or rather children, that have to suffer because of the things that their parents do. The parents may be immoral, they may be doing some things, they may be into drugs or something like that. And because of the things that they're involved in, maybe they are given over to alcohol, and when they do, they become really angry. Um, you know, Something like that. And, the kids don't, they're not at fault for anything. They haven't done anything wrong. Um, but because of what the parents have done, maybe it's both, maybe it's one or the other, it negatively affects the children. And so those are difficult situations. But I think of one of the greatest punishments, or the greatest, perhaps the longest amount of suffering that I can think of in Scripture, is the 40 years in the wilderness. That's an incredibly long time. So you've got many that suffered for lengthy periods of time throughout Scripture, but I don't think Job was suffering for 40 years. I mean, he suffered for sure, and he lost everything that he had. Um, but it wasn't that time frame of 40 years. And so you've got Joshua and Caleb, who are both the spies that went into the promised land, and they were the only two that came out and said, God's got this. I mean, there's no way that these people can overcome us because of the power of God. Let's go into this land. We trust Him. We're faithful to Him. We're going to go into this promised land. They believed in that promise. We're going to go into this land and we're going to enjoy the milk and honey which God has promised. But then the other eight said, nope, there's giants there. We're not going to be able to do this. And it's because of those eight reporting this to the nation of Israel that the entire nation says, nope, we can't do it. We need to get a new leader up in here. Numbers chapter 14, they rebel. They say, we need to find a new leader. It would be so much better if we had just died in Egypt or died in the wilderness rather than to die by the sword in the land of Canaan. Why is it that God has brought us into this land just so that we might die by the sword? And so, because of their response, the first thing that happens when they say this is that Moses and Aaron, they fall down. They're in anguish. They fall down before the people because of their reaction, because their faithlessness. Um, and what results from that is that God says that no one, under the at the age of 20, was going to go into that land except Joshua and Caleb. And, and so you have, for 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, only to die in the wilderness. You know, Moses hadn't done what he did in Kadesh yet. He didn't disobey God with striking the rock. He would have been able to go right in, right along with Aaron. Both of them would have been able to go into the promised land. The way that things were, I think they've only had two Passovers since it was established. They hadn't been wandering in the wilderness for very long. Um, and so they would have been able to just go into the promised land. But because of other people, it wasn't them. They didn't warrant for themselves. Aaron and Moses and Joshua and Caleb, they didn't warrant um, this punishment because of other people's sin, because of other people's faithlessness. They were punished. You know, I think it's incredible that you've got Joshua and Caleb, and they went in and they said, "We can do this. We can do this. You know, let's go into this land that God's promised." And they didn't get to go. Not right away. They eventually did get to go in, but they had to wander in that wilderness for 40 years. And it wasn't even anything that they did. So it's just like, wow. I mean, just the incredible suffering, wandering and having to depend on the manna and the quail, and having to go through this wilderness and be thirsty and wander and pick up and carry everything everywhere for 40 years. I mean, this was a punishment. It was a punishment for the nation of Israel. Um, and it was something that, it wasn't deserved for Joshua, Caleb, Aaron, and Moses. But what's amazing is that even though they didn't deserve that and they went through it, there is an incredible patience with them. Um, Moses continued to lead the nation. Aaron became an even greater leader. Um, they didn't get to go into the promised land, but they stayed faithful to God. Um, I think that it's even said towards the end of Aaron's life, um, while the promised land is not your inheritance, God says to Aaron, "I will be your inheritance." And so they still are rewarded. They still have that promise, to be God's and to be with Him. Um, but as they lived for the most part very patiently. That kind of kind of the patience runs out a little bit when we get to Kadesh and the people are complaining again, and Moses strikes the rock. And then that just kind of proves that each one of us has our breaking point. Um, but they remained faithful. And even when Joshua took the reins from Moses, he led the people into um, the promised land, into Canaan, and led the people faithfully. Even after all of that time, he got up and he continued on, and he lived faithfully and he led faithfully, so much to the point that you have that great legacy at the end of the book of Joshua, where even the elders that outlived Joshua, the people were faithful under them. Um, and so it just goes to show that sometimes we might suffer the consequences for someone else's sin. But that should not be something that causes us to lash out at God. It shouldn't be something that causes us to be angry with God. Um, and sometimes there are some very strong feelings, and sometimes it's, I mean, straight up weeping and crying just profusely because of the suffering that we're in. Um, things that we didn't deserve, but things that have happened. Um, but we should respond in the same way that these men did. They were faithful to God. They continue to be patient with the people. Um, they continued in the ways of God. They didn't forsake the Passover or all those other commands or different things like that. They kept it going. And that's needs to be our attitude. When we find ourselves in difficult situations, we have to trust God. I believe the reason why Moses, in particular, and all of them really, were able to continue to keep going was because they remembered God. One of the most repeated phrases in the book of Deuteronomy is "Remember the Lord your God." It's because when we forget God, we forget the things that He's done. That's when we start complaining, like Israel. That's when we say, "Nope, we can't do it." Um, when we forget our God, we respond in those ways. And so, are we going to be the nation of Israel that complains? Are we going to be the ones that have little to no faith in God? Are we going to bring on our own punishment on ourselves? Um, or are we going to be patient and remember the Lord even through our trials and our suffering? Um, it's a difficult thing for sure. And I won't pretend to know uh, everybody's circumstances and what you go through, and the things that you've faced, and the things that maybe you've suffered because of other people in your life. But I do know that God is faithful. I do know that He is true, and He will always be true to us. His promises are never revoked. His faith is unwavering and unceasing. And so let's let's reciprocate that with our faith. Let's reciprocate that with patience in our situations that we face, no matter the circumstances. I hope this has been encouraging to you. I hope that kind of looking at this example, it just makes you think a little bit. You know, wow, they had to go through all of that, um, and they endured it. They did so with patience, and they did so earnestly in faith, believing God, even though they didn't do anything to deserve those 40 years in the wilderness. If they can do 40 years through the wilderness, you can overcome with God whatever you're going through right now. That has been something that has been guiding me for a long time, uh, especially during those moments of suffering. If they can do that for 40 years, Joshua can suffer for 40 years, then turn around and lead the people in faithfulness, then we can too, because our God is with us. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day today. Uh, and I hope that you found this, again, to be encouraging. God bless.